Urusei Yatsura. Borders of Madnssby Finid 9 based on characters created by Rumiko Takahashi Chapter 3. Beware the fire-breathing Tencha. The Moriboshi kitchen had descended, as it often did on quiet evenings, into something resembling a culinary battlefield. Steam rose in thick, hissing columns from a battery of pots, the air thick with the sharp perfume of garlic and chili. Standing at the epicenter of this delicious chaos was Mrs. Moriboshi herself, spatula raised like a samurai's blade, a look of fierce triumph written across her face. "K, Lum," she announced, thrusting a steaming plate forward with the showmanship of a game show host unveiling the grand prize. "Feast your eyes on this." Dish glowed a vivid ruby red on the white ceramic. Plump shrimp nestled in a sauce so vibrant it seemed to pulse with its own inner light, each one lacquered to a high shine. Mrs. Moriboshi straightened her apron and puffed out her chest. "Chili," she declared. "A Japanese Chinese dish, shrimp stir-fried in a chili sauce. Usually sweet and mild, but it can be made spicier if you prefer. It's a home-cooking staple as much as it is a restaurant classic. Here, try it." Lum, green hair cascading over her shoulders, tiger-striped bikini top glinting under the kitchen light, lifted her chopsticks with the focused gravity of a surgeon. She selected a single shrimp, examined it the way a jeweler might examine a gemstone, and placed it in her mouth. For a moment, nothing happened. Then her eyes flew open. A tremor ran through her. Tiny blue sparks crackled at her fingertips, and her cheeks flushed the same vivid red as the sauce itself. She fanned her mouth with both hands, electricity sizzling in her hair. "That really hit the spot," she gasped between breaths. "Mrs. Moriboshi, where did you learn to cook like this?" The older woman leaned against the counter with the satisfied ease of a master craftsperson receiving their due. "My father taught me," she said simply. Lum tilted her head, floating an inch above the linoleum in that unconscious habit she'd never quite shaken. "Really? And where is your father now?" A stillness passed across Mrs. Moriboshi's face, brief but unmistakable like a shadow crossing a window. Her eyes shifted left, then right. "He's out," she said, with a vague wave of her hand that could have meant anything from the corner store to another dimension entirely. "But on the bright side, he made me the best cook in all of Japan." She paused, and her voice dropped to a mutter. "That is, until I met him." She jabbed her thumb toward the corner of the kitchen, where Mr. Moriboshi had been quietly nursing a cup of sake and hopping with all his heart that no one would remember he was there. He had not been lucky. "Please," he said, slamming his cup down with more force than he intended, sake sloshing over the rim. "Don't bring our marriage into this." Tension that followed had the precise density of chili sauce, thick, layered, and slightly combustible, until the doorbell sliced through it like a blade. Adaru Moriboshi was on his feet before the second ring, launching himself from his chair with the enthusiasm of a man who desperately needed an excuse to be somewhere else. He skidded down the hallway in his socks, executed a graceless half-spin, and flung the door open with a grin that expected, at minimum, a beautiful woman. The night looked back at him. Empty, silent. He scratched his head, already beginning to deflate, and was halfway through closing the door when he heard it. A small, rhythmic sound. Tick, tick, tick. He looked down. A beetle-black insect, the size of a large tangerine, crouched on the welcome mat, its antennae twitching with what could only be described as purpose. 8 glassy eyes reflected Adaru's baffled expression back at him in miniature. Adaru's scream was magnificent. It started somewhere around a dog whistle's frequency, and managed, impressively, to shatter the reading glasses his father had left on the hall table. He backpedaled into the kitchen flailing, arms cutting through the air like the blades of a panicking windmill. Lum, curious by nature and rarely frightened of anything, floated over the threshold and peered down at the creature. Her expression transformed from mild concern to pure, luminous joy. "I can't believe it," she breathed, scooping the insect up with both hands. "It's baby Tencha!" The ant's back split open along a seam that hadn't been visible a moment before. A hatch popped up, and out tumbled a child. He was small enough to cup in both palms, with a wild shock of lime-green hair, a tiny red horn jutting from his forehead, and wide crimson eyes that took in the kitchen with the comprehensive evaluation of someone who had seen worse and expected to see worse still. He wore a tiger-striped diaper and nothing else, and he threw his arms into the air the moment he landed. Lumcha. The collision of the hug sent sparks cascading across the kitchen tiles. Lum laughed, a sound like bells and small thunderstorms, and Ten bounced in her arms with the pure, uncomplicated delight of a child certain of his welcome. "We're going out tonight," he announced to the room. "Are you ready to have some serious fun?" "Hold on," Lum said, setting him down and turning toward the hallway. "Just let me wake up Adaru." Pivoted. Adaru lay motionless on the kitchen floor, arms spread, face slack. The aunt-induced horror had apparently been the final straw. Ten walked over and poked him in the cheek with one small finger. Nothing happened. He poked him again. Still nothing. "Your friend is a corpse," Ten observed, in the flat tone of someone making a minor logistical note. What followed happened very fast. Adaru's eyes snapped open. A frying pan materialized from somewhere unreasonable, and it connected with Ten's horn with a resonant clang that rang through the entire house. "I am alive." Ten staggered, seeing several of everything. He had just recovered his bearings when Lum's fist connected with Adaru's skull in retaliation. A single, precise blow that sent him sliding across the floor and into the cabinet beneath the sink, a thin trickle of blood appearing at his nose. "Adaru." Lum planted her hands on her hips. "Ten is a baby. Be gentle." Adaru groaned from the floor, the cabinet door hanging open against his shoulder. Ten stuck out his tongue. Lum beamed, apparently satisfied that justice had been served, and turned back to the introductions with the air of someone hosting a garden party. "Ten," she said grandly, gesturing to the figure still crumpled against the cabinetry, "I want you to meet my best friend on earth, Adaru Rani Moriboshi." Ten's eyebrows shot toward his hairline. "Best friend?" The words carried the weight of genuine concern. "On earth, I mean." Lum's cheeks flushed. "You're my best friend on Oni." It's different." Squinted at Adaru, who had pulled himself upright and was now, with supreme unself-consciousness, picking his nose. Ten's jaw descended slowly. Whatever he had imagined Lum's Earth companion would be like, it had apparently not included this. "Lum," he said carefully, "are you sure it's okay to bring this guy along? Don't worry. He's not bad, he's just misunderstood." Looked at Adaru. Adaru examined what he'd found. Ten crossed his arms with a rustle of his diaper. "Well, okay, but I don't have to like him." A pause settled over the kitchen like snow. "Come on." Ten's face split into a grin as sudden as a lightning strike. "Let's go have some fun." Lum turned, electric with excitement. "You heard him, Adaru. Let's go." Adaru opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. His hands made vague gestures in the middle distance, as though trying to catch hold of a reasonable objection that kept slipping through his fingers. "But I mean, I was going to," he trailed off. Lum and Ten turned to him in unison. Their eyes in that moment were enormous, luminous. Unbearably hopeful, Adaru's shoulders dropped. "Fine," he muttered. "I'll come." Produced a tiny trumpet and drum from somewhere about his person, a logistical mystery no one thought to question, and blew a triumphant fanfare. The drumstick on the backswing connected with his own horn. "Oh," and then lightning crackled down from a sky that had been clear a moment before, and a UFO descended onto the Moriboshi family's front lawn with a thud that rattled every window in the house. It was small and sleek and painted in sweeping tiger stripes of orange and black. "My lost UFO," Lum exclaimed, with the delighted recognition of someone rediscovering a favorite sweater. Adaru stared at it, then at the sky, then back at the ship. "We're going to another planet?" Lum had already taken his hand. "Come on, darling." Ten scrambled up the ramp and immediately installed himself at a telescope pointing, inexplicably, at the ceiling. The ramp retracted. The engines growled. The UFO lifted off the Moriboshi lawn in a cascade of sparks and left a trail of light across the suburban sky that the neighbors would argue about for weeks. They were barely clear of the atmosphere when a puff of smoke materialized on the street below. 3 figures, stepping out of nothing in a shower of soft, theatrical pops. They wore sleek suits of dark composite material and black blindfolds that seemed, somehow, to impair their vision not at all. 2 were humanoid in a general sense. Third was not. He called himself Spider Keen, and the title suited him. His booster suit was built on 8 mechanical legs that clicked against the pavement with quick, deliberate precision, and the helmet above his collar was shaped with a certain arachnid intent. He moved like something that had decided, long ago, that being frightening was simply more efficient. He dropped to all fours at the edge of the Moriboshi lawn and pressed his helmet sensors to the patch of grass where Ten's aunt's suit had rested. The readings came back immediately. "Saliva," he said. "He was here." Number 1 and Number 2 exchanged a glance and began, in the absence of more specific instructions, poking at things. Planet Oniboshi announced itself through the ship's view screen as a world of deep greens and burnt oranges, its atmosphere shimmering with a particular iridescence that Adaru had no frame of reference for and couldn't decide whether he found beautiful or deeply unsettling. He settled, as was his habit, on both. The banquet hall they descended into was vast. Vast in the way that suggested it had been designed by someone for whom the ordinary scale of things had simply never been a meaningful constraint. Creatures of every conceivable configuration occupied its floors and galleries. Beings with tentacles that served as both limbs and conversation pieces. Things that floated in self-contained bubbles of alien atmosphere. A group near the far wall that appeared to be made entirely of sound. A small jazz ensemble played near the entrance. Guitar and what might have been a saxophone, if a saxophone had been dreamed up by someone who'd only heard one described. Lum transformed the moment she crossed the threshold. It wasn't a dramatic change, visible and sudden. It was more that she expanded somehow, becoming more completely herself. She dissolved into a beam of warm light that wove between the dimming lamps and the hovering guests, laughing in a frequency slightly above audible range. 10, small and fearless, hopped aboard her luminous form as though this were the most natural thing in the world, and rode the current with his arms spread wide. Ataru, walking on 2 ordinary feet like some kind of evolutionary embarrassment, caught his toe on a tile seam and stumbled directly toward a gap in the floor, an opening that hadn't been visible until he was already falling through it, a dark tunnel spiraling away beneath him into something that had no clear bottom. He screamed. Lum rematerialized around his collar, hauling him back to solid ground with the casual ease of someone picking up a dropped glove. Courtship banquet, she said cheerfully, as Adaru's heart attempted to remember its proper rhythm, where everyone comes to party, just stay away from the tunnels. You might have mentioned the tunnels before we arrived. They appeared during my last courtship banquet. She looked briefly, genuinely sad. Father can be a real heartbreaker sometimes. Before Adaru could untangle that, Lum's attention had already moved on, caught by something that lit her expression with simple delight. Oh, a photo booth. 3,045 photographs later, Adaru had counted, in the grim, methodical way of someone who had nothing left but numbers. Lum clapped her hands and declared the final 2 shots would be just the boys. I want to remember the moment my 2 best friends became besties, she said, and floated off with the blithe confidence of someone who had just set something irrevocable in motion. The booth was not large. Ten and Adaru occupied it in the precise configuration of 2 people who would both, given any reasonable alternative, be somewhere else. Now you listen here, Ten said, turning to face Adaru with the gravity of a head of state addressing a foreign power. He had to tilt his chin up to a considerable angle to make direct eye contact, which did not diminish his seriousness in the slightest. We are not going to be friends. We are not even going to be frenemies. Camera flashed. Well, Adaru said. Yeah, we're not friends. I literally just met you. That's the same thing. Ten snapped. Another flash. Ten produced from somewhere about his person a small knife that pulsed with a cold blue luminescence. He raised it to the general vicinity of Adaru's neck. When it made contact, it emitted a small, cheerful sound. Boop, entirely at odds with its apparent threat. You leave me and my cousin Lum alone, Ten said, his voice dropping to what he clearly intended as a menacing register. And my lightsaber and fire breath will leave you alone. Flash. Ten stormed out of the booth, leaving Adaru frozen in place with the wide, hollow expression of a man confronting something he entirely lacks the context to process. The camera flashed once more, catching him in this precise state. The flash snapped him back to awareness, and he turned on the machine with immediate and disproportionate fury, striking it several times in quick succession. Stupid camera, he muttered, and the resulting photograph captured only motion blur and rage. The banquet hall swirled around them as the evening deepened, music rising, creatures dancing, the smell of 1,000 alien cuisines drifting through the air in competing clouds. Lum threw herself into it all with the unconscious grace of someone entirely at home, her light form threading between partners and pillars alike. Adaru tried to flag her down twice and failed both times, once being pulled into a dance he didn't recognize with a partner whose appendages he couldn't properly count, and once being bumped, deliberately, he was fairly certain, by Ten's small, solid body, sending him once more toward the edge of one of the tunnels. He caught Lum's hair on the way down and dangled there, 12 feet above an abyss, until she calmly floated him back to the floor. "Tried to push me into a hole," he said. "Just gets a little wild when he flies," she replied, and looked up to find Ten spinning overhead with a four-armed alien girl whose 4 eyes blinked in 2 different rhythms. Adaru saw an opportunity and took it, as he always did and always would. He shouldered Ten aside and deployed his most practiced expression, rakish, charming, and entirely deluded about its effect. "Hey, beautiful, can I get your phone number and address?" The alien girl blinked all 4 eyes in rapid sequence and drifted away. Adaru sighed. Ten, meanwhile, had spotted something near the hall's main entrance. 3 figures in dark suits and blindfolds. The mechanical spider-legged shape of Spider Keen moving between the guests. Ten's face went very still, and then his expression became one of intense and suspicious casualness. "You know," he said, appearing at Lum's elbow, "I've been thinking the mega arcade sounds incredible right now. Let's go." "Oh," Lum's face lit up. "Sure, I'll get Adaru." Already there, he went ahead to save us a good spot in the cosmic clouds. Looked genuinely touched. Classic Adaru, always putting friends first. They left, and Adaru, in the middle of his 7th failed approach, did not notice them go until he turned around and found himself entirely alone in a crowd of several hundred creatures, none of which were human, with no immediate sense of which direction led out. The mega arcade of Oniboshi occupied a building whose scale had been determined, presumably, by someone who believed that more was simply a category of better. Its ceiling was lost somewhere in the upper atmosphere. Its floor stretched in every direction to a horizon that shouldn't have been visible indoors. 831,000 games occupied the space in configurations of light and sound, and the overall effect was less like entering a building and more like being consumed by one. Adaru had discovered it 30 seconds before 3 beings in dark suits surrounded him. "Oh, my gears and starters," he had breathed, turning in a slow circle. So many video games, and then the suits had arrived. Elsewhere in the arcade, Lum and Ten moved through the light-fractured air unaware. "They haven't even released these yet," Lum was saying to no one in particular, moving down an aisle of machines whose titles glowed in scripts from a dozen different systems. Never-ending Hiver, No Love, No Bells, Survival of the Party. She stopped in front of one with a hand-painted sign above it. "And there's my personal favorite, Dear Miss Momoko My Frenemy, 120% Adventure." Was not listening. Ten had found something better. A high-budget monster combat simulator called Flotilla the Fire-Breathing Robot, its cabinet housing 2 adjacent control panels and a screen currently depicting a mechanical titan approximately the size of a modest mountain. "This one," he said. The machine assigned nicknames before they touched a single button. Lum read them aloud from the screen. "Firefighter and the Great Space Gigolo." Adaru would have said if he'd been there. They played. The game was, as Ten had known and not mentioned, extraordinarily literal in its interpretation of immersive experience. When Ten's character landed a hit, the force registered somewhere in the player's actual body. When Adaru's character was eventually controlling this game and took a blow, he would feel it. "Flotilla the Fire-Breathing Robot," Ten explained to the empty seat beside him, warming to his subject. "The graphics are so real you feel like you're literally in the game. That's why I chose it." Aisles over, Number 1 had located a small rabbit-eared alien child, hypnotized with concentration at a racing simulator, and tapped him on the shoulder. "Pardon me, little fellow," Number 1 said, producing a photograph. It showed a baby, specifically, a baby that appeared to be the same baby currently bouncing in front of Flotilla the Fire-Breathing Robot, wrapped in a blanket and wearing what appeared to be a drawn-on mustache and marker. "You wouldn't happen to know this?" "No," the rabbit-eared child said, not looking away from his screen. "That's quite all right, we are not playing games, boy." Spider Keen's voice filled the aisle like a fog. "Where is he?" Ten heard it from 2 aisles away. His head came up. His eyes went wide. He took one look in the direction of the sound, abandoned the controls at the precise moment that Adaru's avatar, or what should have been Adaru's avatar, was in position for a counterattack, and bolted for Lum. "I'm bored," he said, arriving at her elbow slightly out of breath. "I know somewhere better. Let's go, now, immediately." Lum blinked. "What about Adaru?" "He's waiting for us at the cosmic clouds. He wanted to save us a good spot." The second time that evening, Lum's expression became one of warm, uncomplicated affection for the absent Adaru Moriboshi. "He always does think of others first, doesn't he?" they left. Behind them, in the basement of the arcade, Adaru Moriboshi hung from a wall by chains that were considerably less decorative than they looked, and contemplated the sequence of decisions, his own and others, that had led him to this precise moment. The cosmic clouds were exactly what the name promised. A broad, still expanse somewhere between the arcade roof and the upper atmosphere of Oniboshi, where clouds of iridescent gas drifted in slow formations, and the stars were close enough that you could almost convince yourself they were listening. Lum sat cross-legged on one of the larger formations, chin tipped back, watching a cluster of asteroids drift in a slow procession overhead. Ten sat beside her, legs swinging over the edge of nothing. "Is this relaxing or what?" Lum said. "Yeah," Ten agreed, kicking his feet. They counted asteroids in companionable silence for a while. "I don't see Adaru anywhere," Lum said eventually, Ten's foot swinging slowed. "We don't need him, I'm way more fun." Turned to look at him. Something in her expression had shifted, the contentment still there but overlaid with something more careful. "What do you mean?" A pause. Then, with the specific quality of someone unfolding a story they'd been sitting on for a while. "Funny story, actually, kind of, in a way." Ten laughed nervously. "I may have left him behind, in the arcade." What happened next registered across approximately a third of the Oniboshi sky. Lum's scream was not merely loud, it was structural. It shattered a nearby asteroid into a constellation of glittering fragments that rained down on a city below, and the force of it unbalanced her so completely that she pitched sideways off her cloud, flailing, before catching herself by sheer reflex and pulling herself back to a sitting position. She stared at Ten with an expression he had never wanted to see on her face, the precise shape of hurt. "Could you do that to my best friend? Best friend?" Ten's voice had gone very small. "I thought I was your best friend. He's just a human, just some nobody. Why does he even matter to you?" Lum didn't answer right away. She looked at the stars instead, at the slow drift of the asteroids, at the lights of the city below still settling from the impact of dislodged debris. When she finally looked at Ten, her expression had gone very quiet. She didn't need to say anything. She'd looked like this once before on Oni, after the passion flower incident, after a different kind of loss. Ten had seen that look on his mother's face, too, on harder nights. It was the face of someone who had already learned, the expensive way, that the people who matter to you don't always stay. "That idiot," Ten said finally, "means that much to you." Lum nodded. Ten was quiet for a long moment. Then, with the sigh of someone much older than his diapers suggested, "Okay." Basement of the mega arcade had not been designed with any particular purpose in mind, which made it ideal for Spider Keens. It was wide and dim and full of old equipment, retired game cabinets, coils of cable, things that hummed at irregular intervals for reasons nobody had gotten around to investigating. Adaru sat against the far wall, wrists manacled to a conduit pipe, and considered his options. The list was short. Spider Keen circled in front of him on 8 mechanical legs, the click of each step deliberate and unhurried. "We'll ask you one last time," Spider Keen said. "Where is he?" "I already told you," Adaru said, and his voice was remarkably steady for someone in his position. "I don't know who you're talking about." He was, as it happened, telling the complete truth, but this was not the kind of situation in which the truth was especially useful. Spider Keen produced a bucket of water and upended it over Adaru's head. The cold hit like a physical blow. Adaru's teeth rattled against each other. "Colder than the Boomerang Nebula," he managed. Spider Keen considered his next approach, then reached up and began switching the overhead lamp on and off with methodical patience. On, off, stop, that's genuinely horrible. On, off, the door at the top of the stairs exploded inward. Lum came through it like a small and very precise weather event, golden pistol already drawn. Ten was right behind her, and for a moment the two of them stood at the top of the stairs framed by the light from the arcade above, which would have been considerably more dramatic if Ten hadn't caught his horn on the doorframe. "Lum, use this." Ten stepped forward and pressed something small and metal into her hand, a scooter key, worn smooth from use. "I won't need it where I'm going." Looked at him. He gave her a nod that somehow managed to be both determined and sheepish at once, then took a breath, opened his mouth, and breathed fire. The effect on Spider Keen's associates was immediate and comprehensive. The two sidekicks scattered, batting at their singed extremities, and Spider Keen wheeled around in pursuit, which was exactly what Ten had intended. Lum moved. She crossed the basement in 3 quick steps, raised her pistol, and cut through the chains with the precision of someone who had done this before. The manacles fell away, along with a small slice of Adaru's earlobe. "Oh, sorry. You nicked free, aren't you?" He was. The chase through the arcade was, by any reasonable measure, spectacular. 10 moved through the space like something that had been built specifically for confined, chaotic environments, ducking under machines, rebounding off pillars, deploying his fire breath in focused bursts, and when pressed, a secondary talent that produced clouds of green gas from an entirely different anatomical source. The smell alone cleared 3 whole aisles. Spider Keen pursued him through it all on his mechanical legs, tenacious and methodical, until the moment 10 rolled himself into a compact sphere of concentrated flame and blasted directly toward him. Spider Keen stepped aside, and the fireball caught his suit on the way past. Spider Keen stood in the subsequent silence, his 8 mechanical legs intact, his tactical assessment perfect, his booster suit reduced to its component threads, wearing the expression of a being who had accounted for every variable except the one that actually mattered. He was, it turned out, wearing very small underwear. The woman landed in front of the arcade with the ease of someone who had been landing in front of things her whole life. Her suit was practical and precise, a firefighter's jumpsuit with tiger stripes that echoed Lum's own, and she removed her helmet to reveal a face that carried the same bone structure as her son, the same amber eyes, but arranged into something that suggested considerably more sleep and considerably better judgment. Adaru saw her and immediately found reasons to stand up straighter. The mechanical retrieval device she'd brought with her plucked 10 from the wreckage of a retired arcade cabinet with surgical care and deposited him into a glass transport box designed. It appeared specifically for the containment of small children who had recently caused explosions in public spaces. "Hi, Mommy," 10 said, in the voice of someone who had done the math and accepted the outcome. "Hello, 10. "Hello, Auntie." Lum floated over, already smiling. "Hola, Lum." Pressed both hands against the glass. "Lum Cha, what is Auntie doing here?" "Been a bad boy this time," 10 said, with a gravity that seemed, for once, proportionate. "That's why Cosmic School." Lum's face did something unexpected. It lit up. "Cosmic School," 10 blinked. "That's great. There's nothing to be scared of. You just need to work on your strength." Lum's voice was sure and warm in a way that made it sound like something she'd been told herself once and had decided to believe. "I survived it, you can too." Was quiet for a moment. "Thank you, Lum Cha. I promise I'll keep your word. I'll stay until I've learned to control my powers properly." 10's mother smiled. The smile, Adaru thought, of someone who had heard similar promises before and found them endearing rather than reliable. "It's a summer camp, dear. Not the military, although technically it is quite a lot like the military." Turned, and for a moment his eyes landed on Adaru, who had been standing slightly apart from the reunion, hands in his pockets, wearing the careful expression of someone trying to look like he wasn't listening. 10 looked at him for 3 full seconds, which was 3 more than he had ever looked at him without malice. Then he looked away. Lum touched Adaru's arm. "I'm glad you're okay," she said quietly. "I know you two don't exactly get along, but he came back for you, for me." Adaru said nothing. But something in his expression, the perpetual half-smirk, the defensive posture, relaxed fractionally. "All right," 10's mother said, producing the ant suit with practiced efficiency. "Time to go." Climbed into the transport box with surprising willingness. "Bye, Lum, have fun." "Bye, 10, have fun at summer camp." "Goodbye." The ship appeared, as Oni spacecraft tended to, without adequate warning, descending from the upper atmosphere with a sound like the universe clearing its throat. It touched down with a thud that shook the ground, and Adaru, who had taken a half-step back but not quite far enough, disappeared under the landing strut. The ship lifted off. In the settling silence, something that had recently been Adaru Moriboshi began in stages to reconstitute itself from the pavement. The process was ungainly and involved a number of sounds that had no good descriptors. "Darling." Lum dropped to her knees beside him. "Are you okay?" Adaru considered the question seriously. "Define okay," he said. The Moriboshi backyard was quiet in the way that only the hour before midnight can be. Not empty exactly, but attended, as though the night were paying close attention to whatever happened in it. The stars over Tomabiki were thick and clear, the kind of sky that only appears in the hours when everyone sensible has gone inside. Lum sat on the back step with her knees pulled up to her chest, her green hair loose around her shoulders, looking upward. She was thinking about Ten, about the way he'd pressed his hands against the glass of the transport box, about the way his voice had gone small when he said it's the end of the line for me, about the way he'd given her his scooter key, worn smooth from use without being asked. She was still thinking about it when she heard footsteps behind her, Adaru's footsteps, shuffling and uneven, announcing themselves the way Adaru always announced himself, slightly before he arrived. "Yo, Lum." She turned and smiled. He was carrying something, the plate of ebi chili from earlier, which had survived the evening's events with the stoic resilience of truly good food. He'd found it on the counter where they'd left it and brought it out here, though he would not, if asked, have easily explained why. "I think this is still edible," he said. He set it down and reached for his chopsticks, and the ebi chili, by some mechanism no one ever satisfactorily explained, and everyone in the Moriboshi household had long since stopped questioning, came to life. It shuddered. It hummed. And then it dragged Adaru into a frantic, shuffling dance around the backyard, his arms flailing, his feet performing steps he had definitely not chosen. "Stop it." "Stop it," I said. Lum watched him careen across the yard and felt the laugh rise in her before she could catch it. A real laugh, helpless and full, the kind that doesn't ask permission. She clapped her hands. Sparks flew from her palms in small cascades and scattered across the grass like fireflies. Adaru stumbled to a halt at the far edge of the yard, breathing hard, attempting dignity, achieving none. Above them, the stars continued their unhurried business. Somewhere far away, past the suburban rooftops, past the atmosphere, past the slow drift of the cosmic clouds, a small boy with lime-green hair and a tiger-striped diaper was, presumably, already causing trouble at his first night of summer camp. And in the quiet backyard of a perfectly ordinary house in Tamabiki, Lum laughed, and Adaru scowled, and the ebi chili sat cooling on its plate with what might have been satisfaction, and the chaos was enough. It was, as it always somehow managed to be, more than enough. Segment 2. Ten's misadventure 10 months earlier. The greenhouse was the kind of place that had opinions about you. It was humid and dense with the particular attentiveness of living things, its glass walls fogged at the corners, its air thick with the competing perfumes of several hundred species, arranged in a taxonomy that suggested both deep expertise and significant personal investment. Every surface held something. Vines that tested edges before committing, flowers that turned toward movement, leaves that felt, in the ambiguous way of very alive plants, watchful. Ten burst through the door like a small, fiery comet. "Hang on, Mom. I'll save you from that killer plant." His flame powers were already crackling around his tiny fists. He'd spotted, through the glass, the sinuous bulk of an enormous passion flower that had wrapped its tendrils around his mother's waist. And he had immediately constructed a narrative around this observation that was vivid, heroic, and almost entirely incorrect. Zara, his mother, who had given him his green hair and his fire and the particular stubbornness that he had not yet learned to distinguish from courage, didn't look up. She was casually unwinding herself from the passion flower's embrace with the practiced ease of someone who had been gently manhandled by plants before and found the whole thing more tiresome than threatening. "Relax, Ten-chan," she said. "I'm plant-sitting for Plantra while she's on vacation." Deflated, the passion flower made a hopeful grab for his mother's elbow. She sidestepped without looking. "Actually," she said, and gave him the look, the one with two possible interpretations, both of them significant. "Since you're here, want to take over watering duty?" Ten's eyes went wide, then wider. What could generously be described as sparkles appeared at their corners. "You want me to take over? Me? I'll be the best planet waterer in the galaxy. I'll revolutionize horticulture as we..." Ten. He snapped to attention. Zara patted his head with the gentle, resigned accuracy of a woman who had been having variations of this conversation since before he could walk. "You're not ready to be a firefighter yet. Now I have to go. Catch you later, son." And she was gone, leaving Ten alone in the greenhouse with his wounded pride and approximately 50 plants that, it occurred to him in the sudden quiet, might not all be entirely harmless. Kamanga, the Wasp King, had approached universal conquest with the organizational discipline of a corporate retreat planner. His primal humanoids, Waspcrow and Waspel, who combined avian calculation with Ursine mass in ways that suggested the universe, sometimes made very questionable decisions, were currently executing what their mission briefing described as reconnaissance, and what amounted to looking through windows until they found someone small. They found 10 arguing with a fern. "She thinks I'm not ready," he was telling it, with the particular intensity of someone who has identified their only available audience and committed to it fully. "Just because of what happened with Quintero. Okay, it was more than once. Okay, it was technically a disaster. But still." Fern had no response. The ceiling gave way. Waspcrow and Waspel descended through the greenhouse roof in a shower of glass and disturbed soil, scattering plant matter in every direction and landing in the kind of dramatic crouch that suggested they'd been practicing. 10 spun around, more offended than afraid. "Do you know how long it takes to grow a prize-winning Venus flytrap?" Waspel lunged, arms wide, and grabbed 10 in what was functionally an aggressive hug. Waspcrow launched his Reaper feather, a spiked projectile of the kind that would have failed multiple safety inspections, directly at 10's face. But 10 had been training. The flame shield came up instinctively, a dome of compressed heat that caught the feather and sent it back the way it came with enough additional force to send Waspcrow backward into Plantra's collection of specimens, marked with warning labels in 3 different languages. 10 used the shield's edge to send Waspel rolling into a display of snapdragons. "That's what you get," he announced, "for messing with the 10. He spotted what he took for Kamanga's bulk in the greenhouse's deeper shadows and charged, flames up, eyes bright, absolutely certain of his victory. He ran, with significant momentum, directly into a stone wall. He lay on the greenhouse floor and contemplated the ceiling, which was spinning gently. Kamanga's camouflage, a technique built on shadow and misdirection, had made him charge at landscaping. This was, 10 reflected with the concussed clarity that sometimes follows impact, a very clever trick. Kamanga emerged from the actual shadows now, large and unhurried, mandibles working with slow anticipation. "And now," he rumbled, "little flame child. Look here, Wasp King." Zara landed from above. She had been, it turned out, not very far away, wearing the expression of a parent who has walked into a situation that is exactly as bad as she'd expected and considerably worse than she'd hoped. In her right hand, she held something small, a doll. Specifically, a doll that looked remarkably like a miniature version of herself. "This adorable little dolly," she said, in the pleasant voice she used for things that weren't pleasant at all, "is actually a new megaton explosive. It has enough power to level cavern jungle." Kamanga's compound eyes fixed on the doll. His sensors swept it. The readings came back uncertain. The doll's materials were outside his database, which was either nothing at all or everything. His mandibles worked uncertainly. Zara raised the doll over her head. The world held its breath. She brought it down. The explosion that followed was real. Not theatrical, not a warning shot, but a full detonation that sent shockwaves rippling across half of cavern jungle, trees uprooted, rocks split along their fault lines, a family of small animals relocating their dinner in the sudden urgent way of creatures with good instincts. Kamanga's exoskeleton held, as it was designed to. The rubble that followed did not particularly care about exoskeletons. In the settling dust, 10 sat up wide-eyed. "Mom." "How did you know the rubble would get him?" Zara brushed debris from her sleeve. "Kamanga's species has reinforced exoskeletons but flexible joints. All that armor makes them top-heavy. Basic xenobiology, sweetheart." She paused. "You might consider reading something other than comic books sometime. 3 days. 10 sat in the corner of the ship's main room and received the full accounting of his errors, delivered by his father with reference to a notebook titled Effective Parenting Techniques for Early Alien Bobbies. Beginner's edition, which had apparently been purchased in a moment of optimism and consulted rather more than anticipated. "Fighting," his father concluded, "is for grown-ups. You stick to homework, video games, age-appropriate activities." 10's mother looked up from Interstellar Gardening Monthly with the expression of someone who had seen this particular play before. "I feel a bit bad," she said. 3 days of lectures is quite a lot. Maybe we should." "Yes, Dad," 10 said. What 10 had absorbed from his mother's demonstration was not the lesson she had intended. It was something else, something about how the gap between perception and reality, cleverly managed, could do the work of 10 direct attacks. He reached into his pocket and produced a small doll. It looked with suspicious accuracy exactly like the one his mother had used in the greenhouse. He placed it on the floor in front of his father's feet. "You might want to be careful where you step," Ten said. His father looked at the doll. His father immediately levitated to the ceiling. Everyone else in the room found the walls. "Ten, don't use that. It could kill us." Opened his mouth to explain that it was just a toy. The doll exploded. It exploded in the way of water balloons at maximum pressure. Not fire, not shrapnel, but a concussive bloom of ice-cold water that soaked every surface in the room, drenched 3 individuals thoroughly, and redistributed what remained of the ship's dignity across the walls and ceiling. The hull groaned. Water dripped from the overhead displays. In the silence that followed, Zara raised one hand. She was shaking water from her hair with the measured movements of someone who has decided, for the sake of everyone involved, to remain calm. "Fact that we had real explosives lying around," she said, "is probably my fault. What followed was catalogued in family history under a name that would not be repeated in mixed company." Ten sat afterward on the edge of his bunk and contemplated the cosmic injustice of consequences, which seemed to follow him with a personal interest that he had not asked for and could not seem to discourage. Above his bunk, his mother appeared in the doorway. "I suppose," she said, surveying the wreckage of the hull and the salty, crystalline remnants of what had been a perfectly good living space, "that I'm going to have to take the fall for this one." She looked at the water and she looked at Ten, and for a moment something passed between them. Not words, not blame, but the particular recognition of people who are, at a fundamental level, made of the same stuff. And that was how Ten learned that the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. Sometimes it explodes. But that, in the end, is a family matter. Next time, in an effort to improve Adaru's grade on his English examination, Lum volunteers to help their teacher Onsenmark with his complicated love life, and accidentally turns him into a cat.